Ginkgo biloba, ancient medicine of the old world, makes you smarter, enhances cognitive function, makes you remember all the details that you'll always forget without it. But is it really true? You know, the Ginkgo biloba is one of those herbs that even people that don't know anything about herbal medicine have heard of, right? This is one of those herbs that blew up and exploded across the world and became a really popular remedy. It was a major herbal fad there for a really long time. And it's one of those herbs that's got mountains of scientific research on it, some of which is great, some of which is not so much. And one of the things that I've realized about ginkgo is that there's a little bit of misunderstanding about this plant and a little bit of myths that I want to bust about ginkgo, because actually this is not an ancient medicine, right? Contrary to popular belief. And there's some specific things that you got to know about ginkgo in order to really see the benefits that we can reap from this wonderful plant, this wonderful medicine, this beautiful tree. But there's some details and nuances that are really important to know about this remedy. So, is ginkgo actually an ancient herbal medicine? And specifically, is ginkgo leaf an ancient herbal medicine? The answer to this question might shock you, but no, it's not. This is a plant. Ginkgo trees have certainly been used for a long time in Asia, but definitely not in the way that most people, when they think of Ginkgo biloba as a medicine, the way we think of it today is not how this plant was traditionally used. In fact, the leaf of ginkgo wasn't traditionally used at all. When we look at Chinese medicine, it was actually the nut of ginkgo that was used as a food and as a medicine. And I would say it's, probably not one of the big major medicines in TCM. And actually the nuts of ginkgo are mildly toxic if they're not properly processed. So it was consumed as a food, probably not a primary food in the similar way that it wasn't really a major primary medicine, though it was used. But when we think of ginkgo, we always think of cognitive benefits, right? It's going to make you smarter. But the nut of the ginkgo tree was actually used as a respiratory tract remedy, right? This was a remedy used to treat primarily dampness in the respiratory tract. So those, damp phlegmatic type coughs. That's really, from my relatively limited understanding of traditional Chinese medicine, that's the way ginkgo nut was classically used. But we don't see any evidence of ginkgo leaf being used. So from a historical perspective, looking at ginkgo biloba, the leaf being used as a medicine is a very novel use, right? This is a relatively recent application of this plant. So when do we see ginkgo leaf being introduced? Well, it was first introduced into herbal medicine in the 1960s, right? So this is less than 100-year-old tradition, right? If we could even call it a tradition at this point, of using the leaf of ginkgo. And the thing that's really important to understand about ginkgo is that when it was introduced into herbal medicine and into commerce, into the marketplace, that it was introduced as a very, very, very concentrated extract that was actually developed by a German phytopharmaceutical company. This product was called EGB 761. If that doesn't sound like a scientific name for something, I don't know what it does. So yeah, that's what it was called, EGB 761. I'm assuming the GB stands for Ginkgo biloba. Who knows what the E, maybe extract, E-extract Ginkgo biloba, and maybe when they finally got it dialed in, it was their 761st try. I don't know. That's just my guess. But this is the standard product that was produced. It was developed by a German phytopharmaceutical company, and I believe it was then a French company, I believe, were the ones that kind of brought it out into the marketplace on a bigger scale. And this product is what essentially all of the research on ginkgo leaf is done on, right? Or to say that a little better, it is the most well-researched form of ginkgo extract. And this is what all of the benefits that we know and tend to think of in regards to ginkgo leaf are done on. And that this is a very important point that I'm gonna kind of circle back around to, that if you're an herbalist and you're using ginkgo leaf, you gotta know that little part, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about what we tend to think of, like what some of the main properties of ginkgo leaf are. And specifically these super concentrates of ginkgo leaf, which, by the way, is about a 50-to-1 concentrate. 50-to-1, okay? So that means that if this was a liquid extract, that means for every one, you're getting 50 grams of herb per 1 milliliter of tincture. If it was a liquid extract, most of these are going to be more of like a powder. So that would be like 50 grams to 1 gram, 50 grams of herb to 1 gram of extract. That's crazy strong, right? Especially when you consider most herbal tinctures are, around 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 gram per 3 to 5 milliliters. If you've got a pretty good strong tincture, you're a fluid extract, that would be a 1-to-1, so 1 gram of herb per 1 mil of extract. But 50-to-1, this is the type of extract that is outside the scope of most home herbalist capabilities to produce, right? In order to do an extract like that, you either have to have a ton of patience and time, a lot of plant material to be able to have, and a lot of plant material and be willing to accept a very small yield, and typically equipment that is just not available to the home medicine maker. So let's talk about some of the properties here. First and foremost, ginkgo biloba is a circulatory stimulant. And to me, this is really one of the primary properties of this extract. And ginkgo does its circulatory stimulation quality in a bit of a different way than what we tend to think of circulatory stimulants as these pungent, warming, spicy, aromatic type herbs that move the blood, right? They warm up the core, they radiate that warmth out to the periphery, they drive blood up to the surface. Things like rosemary, cayenne pepper, prickly ash, ginger, garlic, right? These are really hot, spicy, warming, pungent herbs that tend to drive blood. Ginkgo is pretty interesting in the way that it stimulates circulation, in that it has a vasodilating effect. So rather than pushing blood through the system, it's actually opening up the vasculature, the capillary beds, the arterial walls. It's dilating those blood vessels so a greater volume of blood can flow through the system and ultimately, get more blood and therefore oxygen and therefore nutrients to the cells. And also conversely, that will actually help with, probably a bit of generally circulatory stimulants. You think the delivery side of things, but also the what would be the opposite of delivery? Carrying away waste products, basically, right? Helping to clear metabolic waste by just driving blood flow. And what we find with the ginkgo biloba extracts is that it specifically drives that blood or dilates those blood vessels in the head, right? In the brain, in the head, and in the periphery, right? So periphery being, the small capillary beds out into the periphery of the body. So when we're thinking of peripheral circulation, this is typically, we're thinking oftentimes of, say, people that have cold hands and feet, or people with Raynaud's syndrome, people with diabetic retinopathy, diabetic neuropathy, atherosclerosis, varicosities, right? This is when we're thinking about that peripheral circulation. And when we're thinking about driving blood flow to the head, this is where we get one of the main properties that we tend to think of with ginkgo, which I'll talk about in a moment. So circulatory stimulant. This is one of the major properties of ginkgo biloba extract. And then it has a neuroprotective property to it, which is pretty unique. So it's been shown to protect neurons or neural tissue from oxidative damage, which, as many of us know these days, oxidative damage is one of the primary causes of degenerative disease, inflammatory damage, aging, things like that. A lot of that is, based on oxidation of the cells and of the tissues. And we tend to think of this as, specifically in the nervous system, when people get a lot of oxidative damage, they tend to neurologically age faster, and that can ultimately lead to a lot of those degenerative neurological diseases commonly associated with old age, things like dementia, things like Alzheimer's. But we also have other nerve diseases like Parkinson's disease. We've got neurological symptoms like vertigo. We've got people that have strokes and have nerve damage from strokes, so recovery from strokes and things like that. These are all some of the ways that ginkgo biloba has been applied based on its neuroprotective properties. And the third primary action that I tend to think of with ginkgo, you might look up ginkgo and find a big list of herbal actions associated with it, but I really kind of like to pare it down to what I think of as the main physiological properties of what the herb does. So circulatory stimulant, neuroprotective, and last is nootropic. And the nootropic property of ginkgo really is kind of due to these first two, right? That it is protecting the nervous system, and then it's driving blood up into the brain. Well, if you're protecting your neurons, you're reducing oxidative damage to the neurons, and you're bringing more blood flow up into the brain, you're typically going to expect to experience some enhanced cognitive function. And of course, this is ginkgo's claim to fame as really supporting cognitive health, short-term memory, focus, recall, just general mental focus and clarity, right? So when we're increasing cerebral circulation and we're aiding the nervous system, we're going to see this enhancement in cognitive function. And typically this is applied more for cognitive decline, again, associated with old age, but it has applications beyond that. That can be used. We also see it being used because of this nerve effect combined with cerebral circulation effect. We see it being applied for a variety of other issues with the head, right? Things like tinnitus or ringing in the ear, eye problems. This is a big one. A lot of degenerative visual problems are actually circulatory issues. So people that get glaucoma or macular degeneration, cataracts, and a big one here too is diabetic retinopathy. And the reason that, for example, with diabetic retinopathy, the capillary beds that nourish the eyes are very, very small. And when people have elevated blood sugar over a prolonged period of time, the blood is sticky. It's got a lot of sugar in it. And if you think of the difference of, pour some water over your one hand and pour some syrup over the other, what happens to the one with syrup? It's all sticky, right? And so if you think of that stickiness inside tiny little capillary beds that bring oxygen and nutrients to something like your eyes are not going to be able to get that oxygen and nutrients as well as it would if it was just nice, liquid blood rather than being thick and viscous like syrup. So this is where ginkgo is really, really useful here because it's going to open up all those capillary beds. It's going to help to reduce the oxidative damage and the inflammation and really support eye health. And this is a really, really big one. It's common if you go into supplement aisles at your local co-op or Whole Foods or whatever, and you start looking at the eye formulas, it's very common to see ginkgo standardized extract placed in those formulas. This is why, right? Because of its influence on circulation. Very, very important property. And that property also translates, of course, into a distinctive nootropic effect to enhance cognitive function. So that might not be news to you. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But what's the myth, right? What's the big ginkgo myth? So all of the properties that I noted here, the myth is that this is what ginkgo leaf does, right? That ginkgo leaf has all of these properties. And so what that ends up leading to is herbalists saying, oh, that sounds great. And they order some ginkgo leaf, some dried ginkgo leaf, and they start brewing it up as a tea, which it doesn't really taste very good as a tea, in my opinion. Or they just make a tincture out of it, make a standard 1:5 ratio tincture out of it, and start taking it and expect these types of properties to emerge. And I actually did this too, right? I made a ginkgo spagyric tincture, and I've worked with it a lot because for me, cognitive health is really important because I spend my day in, day out doing a lot of thinking, right? Thinking about what to say in videos like this and creating course content and all that stuff, right? So for me, my cognitive health is really precious to me, and I do a lot of work to maintain it. And you know what I discovered? I was like, what's the big deal about ginkgo? Because I'd take ginkgo and I didn't really notice anything, right? I would take it consistently over prolonged periods of time, and it was like, I don't really notice that much. And what it turns out is that yeah, it doesn't really work that well, not just for me, but like that's what the research shows. And in actuality, standard ginkgo leaf preparations, like a whole plant extract of ginkgo, is shown to be pretty feeble in its circulatory stimulant, neuroprotective, nootropic effects. And so if you've ever done ginkgo as a tea or as a tincture and never really noticed the effects, this is why. So first thing with the tea, the terpenes that are in ginkgo, the ginkgolides, that are the most studied, biochemically active compounds in ginkgo, are not water-soluble compounds. Okay, so this is why ginkgo leaf tea is essentially useless, right? That you're not going to get a good extract from ginkgo leaf utilizing water. It's essentially an inactive preparation. Those terpenes are much more alcohol-soluble compounds. Now, the thing about it is that all of the research that we know and that everybody talks about with ginkgo leaf is done on this standardized, super concentrated, what I would say borderline phytopharmaceutical extract. These are 50-to-1 extracts. That's, you start with 50 pounds of ginkgo leaf and you get 1 pound of final extract. So a 50-to-1 extract compared to a 1-to-5 tincture, I can't even do the mental math to figure out how many times concentrated the standardized extract is from our standard tincture ratio. It's a lot though, right? It's a lot. So, and as I said earlier, these standardized extracts are really beyond the scope of most herbalists in their kitchen pharmacy, or even if you've got a lab where you prepare your medicines. An extract of this concentration is more often than not beyond most herbalists' scope to be able to prepare. Not to mention you would probably need some very expensive extraction equipment to be able to do this. And this is why most, if not all, ginkgo tinctures just don't work. And if they do work, they work like a little bit. Like maybe you'll notice it slightly, but certainly not to the point of, it's like this herb is really, really well known, and you would think with like how much research is done on it, you'd think you'd take it and be like, oh my goodness, like my mind is so much more clear and I can remember where I put my keys and I'm not forgetting things as much. You would think you would really notice this drastic effect, and it's much more subtle than that. And again, this is because we're talking about a standardized extract, right? Essentially a phytopharmaceutical. So this is a matter of concentration, it's a matter of dosage, and it's a matter of the term of usage, meaning how long you're taking it. And this was something that I recently learned from one of my herbal mentors, David Winston, who I can't say enough good things about, but I was introduced to a review study by him where the researchers were looking at all the research done on ginkgo, and they were kind of comparing the studies that showed ginkgo had these amazing effects to studies that said, it didn't really do anything. And the gist of it is basically that ginkgo standardized extract doesn't really work that well when the dosage is below, at or below 120 milligrams for shorter periods of time, i.e. less than 12 weeks. So there's all these studies that were done giving people, say, 120 milligram doses of ginkgo, and over a 12-week or less period, the conclusion was, it didn't really do anything. Now, the studies that showed positive results with ginkgo typically were administering it in doses at 240 milligrams or higher, okay, double the dose, for a significantly longer period of time, greater than or equal to 22 weeks. So about twice the dose and about twice the length of time. And those studies showed, it was really, really amazing and super effective. And there's lots of research, done on ginkgo for, cognitive function, ocular issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, even things like stress, anxiety, irritability associated with dementia, and age-related cognitive impairment, things like that. So this is where, and there's another post that we've done recently this year on talking about scientific studies and why you can't always take the conclusions of a study at face value. So if you were to see a study that says basically ginkgo biloba ineffective for cognitive impairment, that doesn't mean ginkgo doesn't work. It means that at the dosage and frequency and duration that ginkgo was given in that study, it didn't work, right? So you got to really extrapolate a little bit more detail out of studies. This is a kind of a little bit of a trick, I think, with scientific research, and where you have to be a little bit careful. You can't always take it at face value. And it's very common for people to misinterpret scientific studies. So they might go and look at all these studies that say ginkgo doesn't work and just be like, oh, ginkgo, that stuff doesn't work. It's not even proven. Look at all this science that shows that it doesn't work. And that sounds very convincing, right? And you might go, oh, geez, ginkgo doesn't work. It's a hoax. The whole thing's a lie. And it's like, well, no, it's true, but it's true at that frequency, dosage, and duration, okay? So frequency, dosage, and duration is very, very important to look at when you're considering scientific research, and that definitely is true with these ginkgo studies. So if you want to reap the benefits of ginkgo biloba, right? You have to basically, you should use it in the standardized extract, right? This is one of those herbs that I'm not particularly into standardized extracts. I'm not into phytopharmaceuticals. I'm all about whole plant extracts. But if someone was to want to use ginkgo, this is one of those herbs that really you should just use the standardized extract, because that's what everything about it has been based on. So use the standardized extract, use 240 milligram or higher doses, and don't expect to see any results for about 5 months, right? That is really following kind of what the research shows on the efficacy of ginkgo. Now, there's a few warnings, that are, I think, important to mention about these ginkgo extracts that are important to be aware of. So it has anticoagulant effects. It has some mild blood thinning effects. I'm not sure if, blood thinning, what does that mean? Does that mean it's actually decreasing the viscosity of the blood, or is it just dilating blood vessels? That I'm not totally sure of, but general recommendation is to avoid taking standardized ginkgo extracts in concurrence with blood thinning medications like warfarin or anticoagulant, antiplatelet aggregative based medicines. So that's just potential for herb drug interactions there to be aware of. Usually, if we think of a plant that is going to be increasing cerebral circulation, right? We're increasing blood flow up into the head. You're gonna wanna be careful in using standardized ginkgo extract if you have vascular headaches, or specifically vasodilative headaches, where the blood vessels are dilated and you're getting these really full type headaches. You wanna be a little bit careful there, because it can further dilate those blood vessels and make that type of headache worse. Now, if you're seeing vasoconstrictive headaches, tension headaches, especially if they've got a lot of heat associated with it, ginkgo's gonna be great, right? Because energetically it's cooling, and it's gonna help to dilate those blood vessels, and it has been shown to be effective for treating headaches. But again, it's not that ginkgo cures a headache, or ginkgo is a quote headache herb. It's that ginkgo can be used for specific types of headaches and specific types of people. And this is why, for me, understanding a plant based on its core fundamental properties rather than what it's good for is central for the practicing herbalist, right? If you just know, ginkgo's for headaches, you could give it to 10 people with headaches, and if 8 out of those 10 have a vasodilative headache, you're gonna make it worse, right? But if you know that ginkgo dilates blood vessels, if it is a cerebral circulatory stimulant, now you're gonna be able to read the pattern in the person and see where ginkgo would be specifically applicable to a certain type of person with a certain type of headache. There is some, there's been some speculative or theoretical interactions with, or just bad information out there saying that ginkgo is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. This is not true. And ginkgo, from my understanding, does not have any adverse interactions with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRI type medications commonly used for depression. But it is worth noting that sometimes those types of medications are also prescribed for headaches, or migraines. So that's just something to be aware of. I wanted to mention a couple of those contraindications. And again, ginkgo is kind of interesting here because it's a cooling circulatory stimulant, right? This is a little bit more of an odd property. Most circulatory stimulants tend to be warming, pungent herbs. And here we have this really unique dynamic with ginkgo standardized extract, where it will stimulate circulation, but humorally or energetically, it has a cooling energetic to it. So final thoughts, ginkgo, right? This is, I think, a really, really important piece of information for herbalists to be aware of. This explains why, if you've ever used ginkgo or administered ginkgo as a basic tincture or even as a tea, why it probably wasn't working very well. And I think that it's just, if you want to experience the benefits of this herb, stick with what the research says and use the standardized extract, because the results you'll get from a whole plant extract of the leaf is going to be minimally noticeable. And the other thing that I think is interesting to note, especially in that, it's very common for ginkgo leaf standardized extract to be given to elderly folks. And typically that form of preparation is going to be in a capsule or a tablet. What I have noticed is that compliance in elderly tends to be higher with herbal products that are in capsules or tablets, simply because tends to be a little more in their paradigm. Sometimes making tea, or especially if there's cognitive impairment, right? The process of making a tea can be overwhelming. Of course, we don't want to do that with ginkgo. Or even liquid extracts can just seem weird. And especially if they taste awful, compliance can be low. So this is one area where I actually think the standardized extract in tablet or capsule form could be preferable, if especially being applied for the elderly. As many of you that may have been following me for some time know, I'm not a huge fan of phytopharmaceuticals. I'm not a huge fan of standardized extracts. I'm into whole plant extracts. That's just my thing. But this is one of those cases where there might be an exception, where there is an exception, if you just essentially want it to work. So hopefully that helps you have a little bit of a better understanding of Ginkgo biloba, the myth. It's not an ancient medicine, and the leaf has not been used traditionally for a long time. The nut was traditionally used, but has a very different property than what we tend to think of. And if you really want to get the results you're looking for, use that standardized extract. So I'm Sage Popham, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. Thanks so much for watching to the end of this video. I really do appreciate it very, very much. It really helps support the channel here. If you want to further support the channel, just hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Follow us on the Plant Path on the podcast. Leave a good review. It really does help support the channel more than you might know. And of course, if you're scoping this out anywhere other than our website, head on over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, where we've got tons of free resources over there on our Plant Path blog, as well as other free workshops and trainings available to the herbal community. So thank you very much for joining me here in this one. And until the next time, take care and be well.